Hello, my name is Jen Santos and welcome to my presentation on intellectual disabilities for LAI 574. I hope that this presentation leaves you with a better understanding of intellectual disabilities as well as tools to better the learning outcomes of future students. The definition for intellectual disability as stated by the American Association on Mental Retardation is a disability characterized by significant limitations both in intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior as expressed in conceptual, social, and practical adaptive skills. The phrase intellectual disabilities is relatively new. Terminology for this type of disability has evolved, especially over the past 10 years, as our understanding of diversity grows. This phrase is also consistent with the international terminology and conceptualization regarding disability. There are many potential causes of intellectual disabilities. It can be genetically, like in the case of Down syndrome or Fragile X syndrome. It can also be caused by environmental factors such as neglect or malnutrition in infancy. Prenatal illness is also common. This includes fetal alcohol syndrome, which Congress has classified as the most common preventable cause of learning disabilities in children. There are two major defining characteristics of students with intellectual disabilities. They are problems understanding and processing information and problems with adaptive behavior, including but not limited to eating, dressing, social interactions, mobility, and managing money. Generally, people with intellectual disabilities are classified into 4 subcategories in reference to their intellectual functioning. These are mild, moderate, severe, and profound. However, it should be noted that in 2010, the AAIDD suggested moving toward a more multidimensional classification system, including intellectual abilities, adaptive behavior, health, participation, and context. It is important for educators to remember that students with intellectual disabilities are not all the same. The range of disability is very wide, and many of the students who can be classified as intellectually disabled are able to lead normal lives. The majority of students with intellectual disabilities only need learning accommodations in the classroom to be able to succeed. These include students classified as mild and moderate. Students who are classified as severe and profound will require both modification and accommodation in the classroom. The federal government has enacted multiple legislations to begin to bridge the gap between students with intellectual disabilities and the general student body. These include IDEA 04 and No Child Left Behind. Even with these, inclusive classrooms are the exception, not the norm. Students with intellectual disabilities benefit greatly from inclusive classrooms for many reasons. One is that social interaction with their peers encourages students with ID to develop proper social skills as well as create friendships. These friendships create a support system for the student, which is imperative to future learning outcomes. Many teachers have concerns surrounding the idea of including students with intellectual disabilities into inclusive classrooms. Some concerns are the cognitive differences between students, difficulty finding modifications and accommodations for students with ID, and effective monitoring of student progress. A good strategy for teachers to implement in an inclusive classroom is to give students many opportunities to respond. One way of doing this is the use of response cards. Because of social pressures, many students choose to stay quiet instead of voice a wrong answer. The response cards allow everyone to answer without being singled out. In a recent study by Clark et al., the use of response cards was monitored in a 3rd grade gen ed classroom. By the conclusion of the study, the teacher had gained an improved understanding of student abilities and was surprised at the amount of retained information that ID students had. She also noted that this strategy helped other students who were not ID remain on task and involved in the learning process. Use of response cards is also a good example of the principle of partial participation. Partial participation is the idea that anyone and everyone can and should participate in most activities. This principle prevents ID students from becoming distanced from the other students in the gen ed classroom. Another strategy that can be effective is the use of varied instructional arrangements. These include small group work, interactive projects, cooperative groups, and team building work. These models increase overall student involvement and enforce proper adaptive behavior lessons as well. The final strategy I feel is important to include in teaching students with intellectual disabilities is to encourage these students to join groups outside of the classroom, including clubs, teams, and public service organizations. Just like the average student, ID students require opportunities to engage with people their own age. This is how they develop and build upon adaptive behaviors critical for their future. One accommodation that educators can implement in the classroom is the use of technology. Students with ID can be provided with tablets during class time that includes online flashcard programs, preset vocabulary notes, or games for the student to play that will help to reinforce concepts taught that day. Another accommodation that can be easily incorporated into the classroom is the use of visual guides demonstrating required tasks for the day. This allows the student to follow along and participate in the activity, even if their cognitive abilities are behind the rest of the class. Overall, there are many things to keep in mind when preparing to instruct students with intellectual disabilities, especially in an inclusive classroom. Students' abilities will vary, but one thing remains the same, and it is the most important concept of all. It is that these students have value and their education is important. Do you agree that students with intellectual disabilities have the best chance for becoming productive members of society by being involved in inclusive classrooms? Why? Is there a cutoff level? I hope this presentation was informative. Thank you for watching.